The discovery did not begin with expectation. There were no rumors pointing toward it, no speculation building in advance, no sense that anything extraordinary was waiting behind closed doors. And yet, in the quiet aftermath of Evel Knievel's passing, attention gradually turned toward a place that had long remained private, his personal garage. To the public, it had always been just another part of a legendary figure's life. But to those who stepped inside, it quickly became clear that it was something far more significant. It was not simply a storage space. It was a preserved archive of risk, ambition, and a lifetime defined by pushing limits. At first glance, the contents appeared familiar. Motorcycles, equipment, tools, all the expected elements associated with one of history's most daring stunt performers. But as the inspection continued, the true depth of what had been left behind began to emerge. These were not ordinary machines. Many were custom-built, modified beyond recognition, engineered specifically for jumps that had captured global attention. Each scratch, each alteration, each reinforced component told a story, not just a performance, but a preparation of the calculated risks that existed behind every public spectacle. Among the items were prototypes and experimental designs, machines that had never been seen by audiences, never featured in televised events, never included in the official narrative of his career. These hidden projects revealed a side of Knievel that extended beyond performance into innovation. He was not only executing stunts, he was constantly refining the tools that made them possible. The garage, in this sense, functioned as both workshop and laboratory, a place where ideas were tested long before they reached the public eye. Documents and notes added another layer to the discovery. Plans sketched by hand, calculations estimating distance, speed, and impact, adjustments marked in margins. These details transformed the image of Knievel from a fearless performer into something more complex, a strategist who understood that survival depended not just on courage, but on precision. The risks he took were real, but they were rarely reckless. They were studied, measured, and revisited repeatedly before being brought to life. What surprised many observers was the level of organization within the space. Despite the chaotic nature often associated with extreme stunt work, the garage reflected structure. Tools were arranged with purpose, equipment categorized, projects separated by stage of completion. It suggested a discipline that contrasted with the public image of unpredictability. Behind the spectacle was a system, one that allowed risk to be managed rather than simply embraced. There were also personal elements woven into the environment, memorabilia, photographs, and items that connected the machines to moments in his life. They served as reminders that each stunt was not an isolated act, but part of a larger journey, one that combined performance, identity, and legacy. The garage became more than a workspace. It became a reflection of how Knievel saw himself, not just as an entertainer, but as someone constantly building, testing, and evolving. As the contents were examined more closely, a broader realization began to take shape. The legacy of Evel Knievel had always been defined by what the public could see. The jumps, the crashes, the moments of triumph and failure broadcast to millions. But within that garage existed the unseen half of that legacy. The preparation, the experimentation, the failures that never reached an audience, and the ideas that remained unfinished. In many ways, what was found there did not shock because it was unexpected, but because it revealed how much had remained hidden. It challenged a simplified narrative of fearless spectacle and replaced it with something more layered, a story of discipline, calculation, and relentless pursuit of possibility. The garage was not just a collection of objects. It was a record of process. And as the doors eventually closed again, the significance of that discovery lingered, not as a moment of surprise alone, but as a deeper understanding of the man behind the legend. Because sometimes the most revealing parts of life are not found in the moments seen by the world, but in the spaces where those moments were quietly built. The deeper examination of that space revealed something even more compelling, a sense that the garage had never truly been finished. For Evel Knievel, it was not a place where work concluded, but where it constantly evolved. Projects appeared paused rather than abandoned. Tools were positioned as if they might be picked up again at any moment. There was an unfinished quality to the environment, not in a careless way, but in a way that suggested momentum, the kind of momentum that defined his entire life. Even in absence, the space carried a feeling of continuation. As investigators and close observers moved deeper into the collection, they began to notice variations in design that pointed toward different phases of his career. Earlier machines showed simpler construction, raw and direct, reflecting a time when risk was approached with instinct and boldness. Later build, however, revealed increasing sophistication, reinforced frames, modified suspensions, and careful weight distribution. These were not random adjustments. They reflected learning. Experience had been translated into engineering, and every iteration told the story of how survival and performance had become more closely linked over time. There were also signs of ideas that had never reached completion: partially assembled frames, components grouped together but never fully integrated, notes attached to unfinished builds, outlining possibilities that had yet to be tested. These fragments hinted at ambitions that extended beyond what the public had witnessed. They suggested that even after achieving global recognition, Knievel had continued to think ahead, to imagine stunts that were bigger, more complex, perhaps even more dangerous than those already attempted. One particularly striking element was a condition of certain machines that had clearly endured impact: bent metal, reinforced joints showing signs of stress, repairs layered over previous repairs. These were not preserved as pristine artifacts. They remained marked by use, by collision, by failure, by recovery. In many ways, they represented the reality behind the spectacle. Every successful jump carried the possibility of failure, and those failures left visible traces. The garage preserved those traces without concealment. Beyond the machinery, the environment itself contributed to the overall impression. The lighting, often described as subdued, cast long shadows across the workspace, emphasizing texture and detail. The smell of oil, rubber, and aged metal lingered, a sensory reminder of constant activity. Even in stillness, the space felt active, as though it retained the energy of everything that had taken place within it. There was also a noticeable absence, not of objects, but of explanation. Many items existed without labels, without clear documentation, without a defined place in the official timeline of his career. This absence created a sense of mystery. It required interpretation. Those examining the space were not simply observing. They were piecing together a narrative from fragments. And in doing so, they began to understand that the public version of Knievel's story had always been incomplete. What emerged from this process was a more complex portrait. Evel Knievel was not driven by risk alone. He was driven by iteration, by the constant need to improve, to adjust, to push boundaries not just outward, but inward through refinement and understanding. The garage, in this sense, functioned as both evidence and metaphor. It showed how progress is rarely linear. It moves through trial, error, and repetition. As the analysis continued, discussions began to shift. What had initially been framed as a shocking discovery gradually transformed into something more meaningful. The surprise was not in any single object, but in the collective story they told. A story of preparation that matched performance, of discipline that balanced daring, of a private world that supported a very public identity. Even those who had followed his career closely found themselves reconsidering what they thought they knew. The garage revealed a side of Knievel that had never been fully visible, one defined not by applause, but by effort. It showed that behind every moment of spectacle was a process that required patience, calculation, and resilience. And perhaps most importantly, it left behind questions rather than conclusions. What would he have built next? What ideas remained only partially formed? What limits had he yet to challenge? These questions lingered in the space, embedded in unfinished projects and untested designs. Because in the end, the garage did not feel like a final chapter. It felt like an interrupted one, a place where motion had paused, but the intention behind it remained. And in that stillness, the legacy of Evel Knievel became more than a series of recorded feats. It became a continuous process of creation, risk, and reinvention, one that extended far beyond what the world had ever seen. The longer the space was studied, the clearer it became that the garage was not simply a personal workshop. It was a living record of a mindset. For Evel Knievel, risk was never isolated to the moment of the jump. It began long before in spaces like this, where ideas were tested, refined, and sometimes quietly abandoned. The garage held evidence of that process, in its purest form. It showed how every public stunt was supported by countless unseen decisions, each one contributing to the final outcome. One of the most revealing aspects was a layering of time within the space. Machines from different eras stood side by side, creating a visual timeline of evolution. Early designs appeared almost raw, stripped down, focused purely on function. But as the years progressed, the engineering grew more advanced. Safety features, structural reinforcements, and precise modifications reflected a deeper understanding of both the possibilities and the dangers involved. It was not just about going further or higher. It was about doing so with greater control. In several corners of the garage, observers found clusters of components that seemed to belong together, wheels paired with frames, engines aligned with mounting systems, yet never fully assembled. These groupings suggested ideas in progress, concepts that had been started but not completed. Some appeared to be variations of existing designs, while others hinted at entirely new approaches. The absence of completion did not diminish their significance. Instead, it emphasized the constant forward motion of Knievel's thinking. He was not only building for the present, he was always building toward what might come next. The written materials added